in touch, and that's exactly what we want. We can hear from one now, actually, because Pete Davey, who's also on the board of the Newcastle Supporters Trust, joins us right now. Right, Pete, good morning to you. Thanks for coming on. This situation for Newcastle, do you see it as going from bad to worse right now?
Yeah, it's not an ideal situation to be in as a Newcastle United fan. The summer hasn't been a good one in itself already. On top of that, you've got this situation of Alexander Isak, which doesn't seem to be letting up at all. And yeah, it's not an ideal situation for us as Newcastle United fans, because we should be right now with 4 days to go before the season starts. So our mind should be fully set on Aston Villa away on Saturday. But instead, we've got this saga that's just continuing on and on and on. And I have to say, it's been handled really, really poorly from my perspective with regards to Alexander Isak. I know Jay's made a couple of points on there just before I came on, and I fully agree. I really do think that him and his agent has handled this situation poorly.
With that in mind, is there any way back from him now?
Well, if you ask Newcastle United fans, and I've spoken to many have voiced their opinions on Alexander Isak, even just this morning. There doesn't seem to be a way back for Alexander Isak. And there's two sides to the coin here in this situation, because I do feel that he has burnt his bridges, and I do feel like he's doubled down on this situation, because he's put all his cards out, not playing at Celtic, then not travelling to pre-season tour. On top of that, he's now having to double down and saying he's never playing for the club again, because it doesn't look like, at this point, that Liverpool are going to come back in with a second bid. But, you know, I'm with the club on this one as well, because everyone's talking about Alexander Isak, you know, being one of the best strikers in the world, and he is absolutely that. And talking about he deserves a wage befitting of that.
Hold on, Pete. Do you not think that Eddie Howe and the club need to, you know, they have some responsibility as well, because there was a lot of, you know, when Isak first went back, he's carrying a thigh injury. Then it was like his head's not right. Then he handed in the transfer request. Then they sent him home, and then he went to go and do his own training at Real Sociedad. I feel like both parties have a part to play in this. What do you think?
Well, I actually think Eddie Howe has protected him in this situation. I think Eddie Howe has looked out for him, even though he's behaved the way he has. I do think Eddie Howe has looked out for him and tried to, you know, protect the player, because
the way you would protect a player,
he wants him there.
But the way you would protect a player is by keeping the player with the squad. When you just ostracize him and send him back to train by himself, that's not keeping the player happy. No player wants to train by themselves.
This badge right here is Newcastle United. Nobody's bigger than the club. If a player is behaving in that manner, there is no way that he can just be reintegrated into that squad without certain processes going through. Jay, you know this. You've played the game. You know and have seen players that have behaved in this manner going back. This right here is the club. Nobody's bigger than that. And he shouldn't just have a divine right to come back in after he's behaved in that way. There should, well, be a process for that. The club have a value on his head. No, he is considered one of the best strikers in the world. He is valued at a certain fee, as well as the fact that he's burnt his bridges and maybe should well leave the club. At the same time, Newcastle United are absolutely well in their rights to demand a value on that, and I think that's been missed in all of this conversation. There's a value on his head. If the club that want him don't meet that value, then he doesn't leave. But his behaviour is in between that and not acceptable.
And you're 100% right. There is a value on Isak, and that value is put out there by Newcastle, right? But Newcastle could have avoided this as well by just selling him. If he say he wants to leave, what's the point in keeping a player that doesn't want to be there? And to allude to what you were saying about Isak, we don't know, and you don't know, the fans don't know what has been promised behind closed doors. We've heard of loads of situations with Harry Kane getting promised handshakes and whatnot, and at the end of the day, you don't know what's going on. All you hear is what the club has put out there. So I think it's unfair to just judge Isak and say he's the bad guy in all this. I think both parties have their part to play.
Look, there's historical things, like you said, we don't know everything. And there's historical things that are now starting to come out from before the end of the season and so on that may have well have got us to that point. And absolutely right. The club are responsible to a point. But the behaviour and what we're talking about right now is the outburst of the player. So I can only talk about the outburst of the player right now. Now, to answer your initial point, is that why are Newcastle not just selling him and moving on? Well, for me, I think Newcastle United need to make a stand here. For me as a fan and for the club, they do not want to create a pathway for players to think that they can just behave like this and that's their way out of the club. Newcastle United need to hold their ground and say, hold on a second, this is not how players leave Newcastle United. You have to do it in a proper manner. You have to do it in a proper way. So actually, there are two sides to the coin, and I do believe this is why Newcastle are being very staunch right now and going, no, this is the value, this is what you need to pay in order for you to get your player and for Isak to leave the club. That's where it is.
Pete, Sky Sports News is on in pretty much every training ground up and down the country. There is a chance that Alexander Isak is watching this right now. On behalf of the supporters, what's your message to him?
Do the right thing. Do the right thing. Alexander Isak at some point will get his move, but you're a professional footballer. Get your head down. Get yourself back into the training. Get yourself back into the games. Do what you do best. Get yourself on the football pitch, score goals, and play 100% for the team that you are currently contracted to, Newcastle United.
Pete, thank you.
Take care.
Jay, just a final point on this for now anyway, because there's something new every day. But how realistic is it that it gets to the end of the transfer window, Alexander Isak hasn't had a move, so he stays at Newcastle and doesn't play? I think, very rare.
Yeah, I don't think that will happen. There's no way that will happen. Isak will want to play. I know that he's, you know, this has come out, and obviously that's his stance where he's saying that, but that's because he's trying to force a move. I think both Newcastle want him to play and will integrate him back into the squad if he says he wants to play, and I think the player will do exactly the same thing. I want to play as well. And the fans, from what Pete said, you know, they're saying that they might not want him back. There's no way back. But I'm sure if he starts, if he starts scoring again, they're going to love him there.
Yeah.